Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Sovereign's Wrath, his three eyes scanning the holographic display showing the small blue planet that had dared to defy the Valtharian Empire. The planet called itself Earth, home to a species that called themselves humans. Such arrogance from a backwater world barely capable of interstellar travel. "Admiral," his tactical officer hissed through mandibles that clicked nervously. "The intelligence reports suggest these humans have some unusual capabilities. Perhaps we should..." "Silence!" Zethkar's voice echoed through the bridge, causing several junior officers to cower. No species in the Outer Rim has ever successfully resisted Imperial expansion. These humans will fall like all the others. The Empire had conquered over 3,000 worlds in the past millennium. Each species followed the same pattern: initial resistance, feudal battles, eventual surrender, and finally grateful acceptance of Imperial rule. The Valtharians brought order, technology, and purpose to primitive civilizations. It was their burden and their glory, but Earth had responded differently to their ultimatum. Instead of the expected fear and submission, the humans had sent a simple message: come and take it. Such defiance was unthinkable. The Empire's superiority was absolute. Their technology was centuries ahead of these primitives, who had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their military doctrine was perfected through 1,000 campaigns. Their ships were fortress cities that had never known defeat. Zethkar reviewed the intelligence reports one more time. Humans were a young species, barely 10,000 years into their recorded civilization. They had only achieved spaceflight within the last century and had spread to perhaps 50 star systems. Their military consisted of improvised fleets cobbled together from exploration vessels and mining ships. They possessed no unified government, no coherent strategy, no experience with interstellar warfare. By contrast, the Valtharian Empire spanned 12,000 star systems across a quarter of the galaxy. Their military had been forged in the fires of conquest for over a millennium. Each Imperial ship carried enough firepower to glass a continent. The Sovereign's Wrath alone mounted weapons that could crack a planet's crust. "Deploy the standard pacification protocol," Zethkar commanded. "Orbital bombardment of 3 major population centers should convince them to surrender. We'll give them 1 standard day to reconsider their position." The weapons officer hesitated. "Admiral, there are unusual energy readings from several points on the planet's surface. Our sensors are detecting what appears to be..." "I don't care if they have antimatter cannons," Zethkar snarled. "Nothing these primitives possess could threaten an Imperial fleet. Execute my orders." The first bombardment struck Earth's lunar colonies with surgical precision. The message was clear: surrender now or face the complete destruction of your civilization. It was a tactic that had worked on every other world the Empire had encountered. But instead of surrender, something unprecedented happened. The humans began to fight back. It started small. A few mining vessels launched from the asteroid belt, moving with unusual speed and purpose. Then more ships appeared from hidden bases throughout the solar system. These weren't the crude exploration vessels the Empire had expected, but sleek, purpose-built warships that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "Where did those ships come from?" Zethkar demanded, as his tactical display lit up with new contacts. Intelligence reported no significant military infrastructure. "Unknown, Admiral. Our scans show..." "This is impossible. Some of those vessels are reading as constructed from materials we don't recognize. And their engine signatures. They're moving too fast. Our calculations show their drives should tear their ships apart at those acceleration rates." Zethkar studied the display with growing unease. The human fleet was smaller than his own, but they moved with a coordination and speed that defied his understanding of physics. Worse, they weren't retreating or positioning defensively. They were accelerating directly toward his fleet. "Impossible," he muttered. "No species attacks an Imperial fleet head-on. It's suicide." But as the human ships closed distance, something else became apparent. They weren't using conventional weapons. Energy readings spiked across the electromagnetic spectrum as devices of unknown purpose came online. The very space around the human fleet began to distort in ways that made the Empire's most advanced sensors scream. Warnings. Then the first human ship opened fire. The weapon that struck the Imperial cruiser. Dominion's Edge didn't follow any known principles of physics. There was no energy beam, no projectile, no explosion. The 1,000-meter warship simply ceased. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only empty space and confused sensor echoes. Across the Imperial fleet, alarms began sounding. Ships that had never known fear suddenly found themselves facing weapons they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't defend against. The tactical advantage of superior numbers meant nothing when the enemy could apparently delete ships from existence. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Zethkar shouted. "Return fire! Destroy these primitives!" But the Imperial response was sluggish compared to the human fleet's impossible agility. Ships that should have required minutes to change course were dancing through space like fighters. Their weapons reached across impossible distances to strike with pinpoint accuracy, and with each shot, another Imperial vessel simply vanished. Within 10 minutes of engagement, the Valtharian Empire lost more ships than in the previous 100 years of conquest combined. The humans fought like nothing in the Empire's vast databases of military encounters. They showed no fear, no hesitation, no regard for the overwhelming odds against them. And in the depths of space, monitoring stations throughout the galaxy began detecting something that hadn't been seen for millennia: the awakening of technologies so ancient that most species had forgotten they ever existed. Technologies that the youngest races had never known about, but which the oldest civilizations remembered with terror, as Admiral Zethkar watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by impossible weapons wielded by a species that should have been primitive savages. A horrible realization began to dawn. The intelligence reports had missed something crucial about humanity, something that would have changed everything if they had known. The humans weren't a young species at all. They were something far older and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And the Valtharian Empire had just made the greatest mistake in its 1,000-year history. They had awakened something that the galaxy had prayed would remain sleeping forever. Captain Sarah Chen watched the tactical display from the bridge of the UES Retribution, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Around her, the crew worked with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and precise. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, though none of them had expected it to come so soon. "Temporal displacement drives are operating within normal parameters," reported her chief engineer, a woman whose calm voice belied the revolutionary technology she was monitoring. "Reality anchors are holding steady. We can maintain current combat operations for approximately 6 hours before requiring recalibration." Sarah nodded, her attention focused on the Imperial fleet that was rapidly discovering the futility of their invasion. The Valtharians had made the same mistake that countless other species had made throughout galactic history. They had assumed that technological development followed a linear path, that newer civilizations were necessarily more primitive than older ones. They had no idea how wrong they were. "Commander Torres," Sarah called to her weapons officer. "Target the flagship. Use a Class 3 reality disruptor. I want them to understand what they're dealing with before we end this." "Yes, Captain. Charging reality disruptor. Target acquired." The Sovereign's Wrath was a magnificent ship by conventional standards. 2 kilometers of advanced armor, shields that could deflect stellar radiation, weapons capable of orbital bombardment. It represented the pinnacle of Valtharian engineering, the pride of an empire that had never known defeat. It was also completely defenseless against weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The reality disruptor fired, and a section of the Imperial flagship simply wasn't anymore. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but edited out of existence as if it had never been built. The massive dreadnought lurched as structural supports that had been there moments before were suddenly absent, leaving a perfectly spherical void in its hull. "This is Admiral Zethkar of the Valtharian Empire," came a transmission from the damaged flagship. For the first time there was uncertainty in the alien's voice. "What manner of weapons are these? What species are you really?" Sarah activated the comm system, her voice carrying across the void to reach ears that had never heard such words before. "We are humanity, Admiral. And you have made a grave error. Impossible. Our intelligence shows you are a primitive species. You have only possessed spaceflight for a century." "Your intelligence is correct, Admiral. We have indeed only possessed spaceflight for a century, but we have possessed other capabilities for much, much longer." On her personal display, Sarah could see the readings from deep space monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Ancient networks were coming online. Systems that had been dormant for eons were responding to the activation of human technology. The galaxy's oldest civilizations were detecting energy signatures they had hoped never to see again. Humanity's secret was not technology in the conventional sense. It was something far more fundamental, something that touched the very nature of reality itself. While other species had developed advanced physics and engineering, humans had evolved something different. They had developed the ability to perceive and manipulate the underlying structure of existence. It had taken them millennia to understand what they were, centuries more to learn to control it. The development of spaceflight had been almost incidental, a side effect of their growing mastery over forces that most species couldn't even detect. They had spread slowly through space not because they lacked the ability to travel faster, but because they were still learning the extent of their capabilities. Temporal Engineering is reporting successful timeline stabilization, called her science officer. The causality buffers are holding. We can continue operations without risking paradox cascade, Sarah smiled grimly. Time travel was another technology that most species considered impossible. The humans had mastered it before they had invented the wheel. It wasn't technology in any sense that other species would recognize. It was an expression of humanity's fundamental nature, their ability to exist partially outside the normal flow of causality. The Imperial fleet was discovering this the hard way. Their ships found themselves firing at targets that weren't where they appeared to be, hitting positions where human vessels had been minutes ago or would be in the future. The humans, meanwhile, seemed to know exactly where every Imperial ship would be before they arrived. "Captain," her communications officer called, "we're receiving priority signals from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate cessation of hostilities. Put them through." The display shifted to show a collection of alien faces, each representing species that had existed for millions of years. These were the galaxy's elder races, civilizations so old that they remembered the universe when it was young. Their expressions showed a mixture of fear, awe, and resignation. "Humans," spoke the Council's prime arbiter, a being whose species had achieved spaceflight when Earth's sun was still forming. "We had hoped this day would never come. We had hoped you would remain content with your small corner of space." "We were content," Sarah replied, "until the Empire decided to threaten our home. The Valtharians acted without Council knowledge or approval. They are a young species, less than 2 million years old. They do not remember the old warnings." "What warnings?" Admiral Zethkar's voice cut into the transmission, confusion and growing terror evident in his tone. The Prime Arbiter turned toward the Imperial flagship, his ancient eyes filled with something approaching pity. "The warnings about the Shapers, Admiral. The species that exist partially outside normal spacetime. The ones who can rewrite reality with a thought, who treat the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolutes. But they call themselves humans. Human is simply their current designation. They have had many names throughout galactic history. The first species to encounter them called them the Voidwalkers. Others knew them as the Reality Weavers, the Paradox Children, the Time Shadows. Every advanced civilization has legends about them." Sarah felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. This was always the hardest part, the moment when the galaxy was reminded of what humanity truly was. They had spent so long simply being human, living quiet lives on their small worlds, that sometimes even they forgot the truth about their nature. "The oldest warnings in our archives speak of them," the Prime Arbiter continued. "Beings who exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, who can step outside the flow of time, who can unmake things that were and make real things that never existed. They are not bound by the limitations that constrain the rest of us. And we hoped," added another council member, "that they would never again need to reveal themselves." On the tactical display, the Imperial fleet was falling back, but it was too late. The humans had demonstrated their capabilities, and there was no returning to ignorance. Across the galaxy, ancient detection systems were screaming warnings that the Shapers had awakened from their long slumber. Sarah opened a channel to all ships in the system, both human and Imperial. "This is Captain Chen of the United Earth Systems Fleet. To the Valtharian Empire, you came here seeking conquest. You found something else entirely. To the Galactic Council, we have no desire to dominate or rule. We simply wish to exist in peace. But Admiral," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority, "understand this. We are not the young species you thought to conquer. We are older than your empire, older than most of the civilizations in this galaxy. We have been sleeping, dreaming peaceful dreams among the stars. But if you force us to wake fully, she let the implication hang in the void, supported by the reality-warping weapons that surrounded, the Imperial fleet and the impossible technologies that defied everything the Valtharians thought they knew about the universe. Choose wisely, Sarah concluded, because the galaxy remembers what happens when humanity stops holding back. Emperor Vorthix sat upon the throne of Dominion, his massive form dwarfing the crystalline seat that had been carved from the core of a neutron star. Around him, the Imperial War Council shifted nervously, their usual confidence shattered by the reports flowing in from the front lines. The impossible had happened. The Outer Rim expedition had not only failed, but been completely destroyed by a species that shouldn't have posed any threat. Explain to me again, Vorthak rumbled, his voice causing the chamber's walls to vibrate. How an entire Imperial battle fleet was eliminated by mining colonies and exploration vessels. High Admiral Kestoth stepped forward, his scarred carapace bearing the marks of 100 campaigns. In all his years of service, he had never had to deliver news like this. Majesty, the reports are difficult to interpret. Our survivors describe weapons that appear to violate known physics, ships that moved without engine signatures, attacks that struck before they were fired, enemies who seemed to know our battle plans before we made them. You're describing impossibilities. Yes, Majesty, but the evidence is undeniable. The humans possess capabilities that our science cannot explain. Emperor Vorthak rose from his throne, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of absolute authority. The Valtharian Empire had never retreated from any conflict. They had conquered 3,000 worlds through superior firepower, advanced technology, and unbreakable will. To suggest that primitives could force them to reconsider was close to treason. Then we escalate, he declared. Mobilize the core fleets. Prepare the world-breaker weapons. If these humans possess unusual technology, we'll simply overwhelm them with numbers and firepower that no defense can withstand. Majesty, came a hesitant voice from the back of the chamber. Ancient lore keeper Isthara shuffled forward, her withered form supported by anti-gravity fields. She was old even by Imperial standards, her memories reaching back nearly 1,000,000 years to the Empire's founding days. Perhaps we should consult the deep archives before proceeding. Archives? Vorthak's tone carried dangerous contempt. What could dusty records tell us about current threats? Sometimes, Majesty, the oldest knowledge is the most valuable. The galaxy has seen many civilizations rise and fall. Some left warnings. The Emperor was about to dismiss the ancient scholar when his personal aide approached with a priority communication crystal. The message was from the Galactic Council itself, an organization so old that even the Empire treated it with grudging respect. Imperial Majesty, the holographic figure of Prime. Arbiter Zeflan materialized before the throne. The being appeared ancient beyond measure, its form shifting between dimensions in a way that hurt to look at directly. The Council requests immediate cessation of hostilities against the species known as humans. The Council has no authority over Imperial expansion, Vorthak replied coldly. Under normal circumstances, this would be true. However, these are not normal circumstances. You have encountered a species that requires special consideration. We've encountered primitive rebels, nothing more. Majesty, the Prime Arbiter's voice carried notes of frequencies that touched primal fears buried deep in Valtharian genetic memory. The species you call humans are recorded in our deepest archives under many names. They are not what they appear to be. Old Lore Keeper Isthara stepped forward, her ancient voice crackling with urgency. Majesty, allow me to access the forbidden archives. There are records sealed since the Empire's founding, warnings left by species that preceded us. Something in the Lore Keeper's tone gave the Emperor pause. Isthara had served the Imperial throne since its earliest days, had guided expansion policies that had never failed. If she believed the archives contained relevant information, access granted. But quickly, the Lore Keeper's cybernetic implants interfaced with systems so old their origins were lost to history. Data streams flowed across holographic displays, showing records that predated the Empire by millions of years. Most were fragmentary, corrupted by time and technological drift. But some remained intact, their messages as clear and terrifying as the day they were recorded. Here, Ysithara whispered, her voice filled with growing horror. The Kethamori hegemony extinct for 8 million years. Their final transmission warns of the children of paradox, beings who exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, who can rewrite causality itself. More records flowed past. The Nth Dominion spoke of time walkers who could undo events before they happened. The crystal minds referred to reality shapers, whose thoughts could alter the fundamental constants of physics. Species after species had encountered something they called by different names, but described in remarkably similar terms. Impossible, breathed High Admiral Kesetoth. These records describe beings of pure energy, entities that transcend physical form. The humans are clearly biological. Are they? Ysithara's question hung in the air like a blade. Look at the pattern, Admiral. Every encounter describes the same progression. First contact with apparently normal beings, initial underestimation, devastating military defeat, then the revelation of true nature. Emperor Vorthak studied the streaming data, his strategic mind beginning to grasp the implications. If these records were accurate, humanity wasn't simply another species with advanced technology. They were something that existed partially outside the normal universe, beings that could manipulate reality at levels that made conventional warfare meaningless. The Zenth Collective, Ysthara continued, her voice growing more strained, recorded direct observations before their extinction. They described beings who appeared to be simple biological entities, but could step outside the flow of time, who existed in quantum superposition, who could observe all possible futures simultaneously. And their fate? Total annihilation. Not destroyed, unmade. Edited out of existence so completely that only these archives remember they ever lived. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Valtharian Empire prided itself on superior technology and overwhelming force. But how could conventional weapons affect enemies who could simply decide that the attacks had never been fired? How could strategy work against opponents who could see every possible outcome before the battle began? Majesty, the Prime Arbiter's image spoke again. Understand that the Council does not interfere in normal conflicts. But the beings you call humans are not normal. They are survivors from the universe's youth when reality itself was more fluid. They have learned to manipulate forces that most species cannot even perceive. Then how have they remained hidden? Because they choose to remain hidden. They experience existence differently than we do. What we perceive as linear time, they experience as a dimension they can navigate at will. They can exist as simple biological entities in one time stream, while simultaneously operating as cosmic forces in another. Emperor Vorthak sank back onto his throne, the weight of cosmic authority suddenly feeling like a burden, rather than a privilege. The Empire had conquered 3,000 worlds by understanding their enemies, exploiting weaknesses, applying superior force. But how could you conquer an enemy that existed outside the rules that governed everything else? The deep archives contain one final warning, Ysithara said quietly. A message left by the first ones themselves, the species that achieved transcendence eons ago. It says simply, do not wake the dreamers. Do not force the sleepers to remember what they are, for when they fully awaken, the universe itself must make room for their will. The Emperor looked around his war council, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces. The Valtharian Empire had built its power on the assumption that force could solve any problem, that sufficient firepower could overcome any obstacle. But they had just encountered something that made those assumptions meaningless. High Admiral, he said finally, his voice heavy with reluctant wisdom, cancel the mobilization of the core fleets. Open diplomatic channels with both the humans and the Galactic Council. Majesty, are we surrendering? No, Admiral. We are avoiding extinction. There is a difference. As orders went out across the Imperial communication network, Emperor Vorthak contemplated the first strategic retreat in his empire's history. The universe, it seemed, still held secrets that even 1,000 years of conquest hadn't revealed, and some of those secrets were better left undisturbed. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the research station Deep Thought, watching the swirling nebula where humanity's first contact with the Valtharian Empire had taken place. The battle, if it could even be called that, had ended 3 days ago. Now came the harder part, explaining to the galaxy exactly what humanity was, and why they had chosen to hide their true nature for so long. Around her, representatives from dozens of species worked frantically to update their databases, their understanding of physics, and their fundamental assumptions about the universe. The revelation that humanity was something far older and more powerful than anyone had suspected had sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. Dr. Vasquez, called Ambassador Chen Wei-Ming, Sarah's distant cousin and humanity's primary liaison with galactic government. The Galactic Council is requesting a full briefing on human capabilities. They want to understand what we're dealing with. Elena sighed, running her hand through graying hair. As Earth's leading expert on what the government euphemistically called reality physics, she had spent decades studying humanity's unique abilities. But explaining those abilities to species that perceived reality differently was like trying to describe color to beings that had never experienced light. Very well. Activate the holographic display system. Full spectrum analysis. The observation deck transformed into a three-dimensional representation of local space-time, showing the complex mathematical structures that governed reality at its most fundamental level. To most species, these would appear as abstract symbols and equations. To human eyes, they were as readable as street signs. The first thing you must understand, Elena began, addressing the assembled alien scientists and diplomats, is that humanity doesn't experience reality the same way you do. What you perceive as fixed physical laws, we experience as suggestions. A crystalline researcher from the Arcturus system raised a prismatic appendage. Dr. Vasquez, our instruments recorded your ships violating conservation of energy, moving faster than light without Alcubierre drives, and firing weapons that appeared to delete matter without corresponding energy release. These readings suggest violations of fundamental physics. From your perspective, yes. From ours, we're simply operating according to rules that your science hasn't discovered yet. Elena manipulated the display, showing the hidden dimensions that most species couldn't perceive. Reality has layers, Ambassador Cathara. Most life exists only in what you might call the surface layer. Three-dimensional space, linear time, conservation laws that seem absolute. But there are deeper layers. Older structures that were established when the universe was young and reality itself was still cooling into its current form. The display shifted to show the early universe, when space-time itself had been more fluid, when the laws of physics had been suggestions rather than imperatives. Humanity evolved during a period when these deeper layers were more accessible. We developed not just intelligence, but the ability to perceive and interact with the underlying structure of existence. You're saying humans are naturally capable of manipulating space-time? The question came from a Valtharian scientist who had arrived with the diplomatic mission, his voice filled with scientific fascination, overriding species rivalry. In a sense, think of it this way. You see the universe as a painting, beautiful but fixed. We see it as wet paint, still changeable, still responsive to the right touch. Elena brought up recordings from the recent battle, showing human ships that seem to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Our vessels don't violate your physics. They operate according to physics that your instruments can't detect. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, his expression grave. Dr. Vasquez, perhaps we should address the Council's primary concern. They want to know why we've kept this secret, and whether we pose a threat to galactic civilization. Elena nodded, understanding the fear that drove such questions. Throughout galactic history, species with overwhelming technological advantages had typically used them for conquest and domination. The revelation that humanity possessed capabilities that bordered on the godlike would naturally cause concern. The answer lies in our history, she said, manipulating the display to show Earth's timeline. Humanity discovered our abilities gradually over thousands of years. Ancient civilizations developed what they called magic, mystery schools that taught manipulation of reality through will and understanding rather than technology. The display showed archaeological evidence, megalithic structures that couldn't have been built with primitive tools, historical accounts of impossible events, religious texts that described violations of natural law. We learned early that these abilities came with tremendous responsibility. The power to reshape reality is also the power to accidentally destroy it. Accidentally? The crystalline researcher's harmonics carried sharp concern. Reality has structural integrity, Elena explained. Push too hard in the wrong direction, and you can cause cascading failures that affect entire star systems. Early in our development, we had incidents where inexperienced practitioners caused local spacetime to become unstable. Entire continents experienced temporal loops. Gravity fields fluctuated randomly. In one case, a portion of our planet briefly existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. The assembled aliens absorbed this information with varying degrees of alarm and fascination. The implications were staggering. A species that could accidentally rewrite physical law was potentially more dangerous than any conventional military force. So we developed ethics, Elena continued. Codes of conduct that emphasized restraint, wisdom, and respect for the stability of reality. When we finally achieved spaceflight, we made a collective decision to maintain a low profile. We would explore the galaxy quietly, interact peacefully with other species, and reveal our true nature only if absolutely necessary. And the Valtharian attack made it necessary, Ambassador Chen added. Unfortunately, yes, we had hoped to avoid this revelation for centuries more. But when faced with the destruction of our homeworld, Elena shrugged. We chose to reveal ourselves rather than allow our people to be exterminated. The Valtharian scientist leaned forward. Dr. Vasquez, our military estimates suggest that humanity could conquer the entire galaxy if you chose to. Why haven't you? Elena smiled sadly. Because we remember what happened to the species that tried. The galaxy is full of ruins left by civilizations that gained too much power too quickly. The predecessors, the Void Lords, the Infinite Empire, all destroyed themselves when they pushed reality too far. She gestured to the holographic display, showing the scattered remnants of ancient civilizations. Power without wisdom leads to extinction. We've seen species tear holes in space-time that consumed entire sectors. We've watched civilizations create temporal paradoxes that erase their own histories. We've observed what happens when beings try to remake reality according to their desires, rather than working within its natural flow. So you chose restraint. We chose survival, for ourselves and for everyone else. Elena's expression grew serious. The abilities that humanity possesses aren't unique. Other species could develop them given time and the right circumstances. But they come with a terrible price if misused. We've spent millennia learning to live with power that could unmake stars. And we've learned that the greatest strength is knowing when not to use it. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just another advanced species. They were guardians of knowledge too dangerous for most civilizations to possess. They had chosen to live quietly among the younger races, protecting not just themselves but the entire galaxy from the consequences of unleashed reality manipulation. There's one more thing you should know, Elena said quietly. Humanity isn't the only species with these capabilities. Throughout the galaxy, there are others who have walked similar paths. The Galactic Council itself includes several species that possess reality-shaping abilities to various degrees. We've all chosen the same path: restraint, wisdom, and protection of the natural order. A conspiracy of guardians, breathed the crystalline researcher. A brotherhood of responsibility, Elena corrected. Because when you can rewrite the rules of existence, the most important rule becomes knowing when not to. As the briefing continued, the assembled representatives began to understand the true structure of galactic civilization. Beneath the surface of normal politics and technology lay a deeper reality. Ancient species working quietly to maintain the stability of existence itself, ensuring that the younger races could develop and grow without accidentally destroying everything in the process. It was a burden that humanity had never wanted, but one they had accepted out of necessity. And now, for the first time in millennia, they had been forced to reveal themselves to protect that very stability they had worked so long to maintain. Marcus Reed materialized in the center of the Valtharian Imperial Palace, his form shifting between dimensions as he stepped through the reality barriers that were supposed to make the structure impregnable. The guards raised their weapons reflexively, but Emperor Vorthek gestured for them to stand down. After the revelations of the past week, the futility of conventional defenses against human abilities had become painfully clear. Your Majesty, Marcus said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that somehow managed to avoid submission. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The Emperor studied this human representative with a mixture of fascination and wariness. Marcus appeared to be a middle-aged man in simple clothing, utterly unremarkable by any standard. Yet the monitoring equipment throughout the palace was screaming warnings about spatial distortions, temporal anomalies, and energy readings that spiked beyond measurement before dropping to zero. Ambassador Reed, Vorthak replied, his voice carefully controlled. Your method of arrival was impressive. I apologize for the drama, but I wanted to demonstrate something important. The abilities your people witnessed during our recent conflict represent only a fraction of what humanity is capable of. We could have ended that battle in seconds rather than minutes. We could have made your entire fleet simply not exist. But we chose restraint, and I am supposed to be grateful for your mercy? Marcus shook his head. Not grateful, Majesty. Informed. The galaxy is balanced on the edge of forces that most species can't comprehend. My purpose here is to help you understand why that balance must be maintained. The Emperor gestured to a circular chamber where his most trusted advisors had assembled. Ancient lore keeper Isthara was there, along with High Admiral Kestoth and the Empire's leading scientists. All of them studied Marcus with the intensity of researchers examining a dangerous but fascinating specimen. Speak then, Vorthak commanded. Explain why the most powerful species in the galaxy chooses to hide among mining colonies and exploration ships. Marcus moved to the center of the chamber, and reality seemed to respond to his presence. The air itself became more vivid, colors more intense, as if his mere existence made everything around him more real than it had been before. Your Majesty, what do you know about the Great Filter? The theoretical barrier that prevents most species from achieving advanced spaceflight? High Admiral Kestoth answered. Our scientists have identified several potential filters: resource depletion, warfare, technological stagnation. Those are minor filters, Marcus said. The Great Filter is something else entirely. It's the point where a species gains enough power to affect reality itself, but lacks the wisdom to use that power safely. He gestured, and the chamber filled with holographic images of ancient ruins scattered throughout the galaxy. The predecessors reached that point 8 million years ago. They learned to manipulate space-time, to restructure matter at the quantum level, to move freely through parallel dimensions. Within 1,000 years, they had accidentally destroyed their entire civilization. The images shifted to show the Void Lord's domain, a region of space where the laws of physics simply didn't apply anymore, where reality had been twisted beyond repair. The Void Lords tried to transcend physical existence entirely. They succeeded, but in doing so they tore holes in the fabric of spacetime that still haven't healed. And the Infinite Empire decided that reality was insufficiently perfect and attempted to rewrite the fundamental constants of physics. They managed to create a pocket universe where their improvements worked, for about 6 months. Then the IIT contradictions caught up with them, and 17 star systems were retroactively edited out of existence. Emperor Vorthak absorbed this information with growing understanding. You're saying that ultimate power leads to extinction? Not necessarily. But it requires a level of wisdom and restraint that most species don't develop until after they've gained dangerous capabilities. It's like giving children the ability to reshape continents. They don't understand the consequences until it's too late. Marcus walked to the chamber's viewing screen, which showed the vast expanse of the Valtharian Empire. Your civilization has achieved something remarkable, Majesty. You've built a stable, expanding empire that has brought order to thousands of worlds. You've developed advanced technology while maintaining social cohesion. You've avoided the wars of extinction that have claimed so many other species. But you're approaching the threshold. Your scientists are beginning to discover dimensional physics. Your weapons research is touching on quantum manipulation. Within a few centuries, maybe less, you'll face the same choice that every advanced civilization faces: how to handle power that could unmake the universe. The Emperor leaned back in his throne, considering. And humanity chose restraint. We chose survival. For everyone. Marcus gestured again, and new images appeared, showing human colonies scattered throughout the galaxy, research stations, monitoring dimensional stability, teams of specialists working to repair damage caused by less careful civilizations. Humanity developed reality-shaping abilities early in our evolution. We had our disasters, our near extinctions, our moments where we almost destroyed ourselves and everything around us. But we learned. We developed philosophies and ethics and safeguards. We chose to use our power to protect rather than to conquer. You've been watching us. We've been watching everyone, Majesty. Throughout the galaxy, there are species approaching the threshold. Some will make it safely. Others. Marcus's expression grew sad. Others will join the ruins that litter this part of space. High Admiral Kesetoth stepped forward. Are you saying we're being judged? That humanity decides which species deserve to survive? Not judged, Admiral. Guided when possible. Protected when necessary. But ultimately, every species makes its own choice. Marcus turned to face the military leader directly. Your attack on Earth forced our hand. We had to reveal ourselves to protect our people. But that revelation has consequences that extend far beyond our two civilizations. What consequences? Other species now know that reality shapers exist. Some will seek to develop similar abilities. Others will try to find ways to defend against them. Both paths lead to dangerous research that could destabilize local spacetime. Marcus's form flickered slightly, showing glimpses of the complex dimensional structure he actually inhabited. And some will decide that the only safe response is to eliminate the threat entirely. The implications hung in the air like a sword. If humanity's true nature became widely known, it could trigger an arms race that would make the current conflict look like a minor disagreement. Entire civilizations might unite to destroy what they perceived as an existential threat. What do you propose? Emperor Vorthok asked finally. A partnership, Majesty. The Valtharian Empire is strong, stable, and influential. If you were to become humanity's public face, announcing a formal alliance, sharing selected technologies, presenting our capabilities as the result of joint research, it would provide the explanation the galaxy needs without revealing the full truth. You want us to lie for you. I want us to protect the galaxy together. Your empire gains access to technologies that will secure your position for millennia. Humanity gains the political cover we need to continue our work without triggering panic. And the galaxy as a whole remains stable while younger species have time to develop the wisdom they'll need when they face their own thresholds. The Emperor considered this proposal, weighing the benefits against the risks. Alliance with humanity would make the Valtharian Empire the most powerful force in known space, but it would also make them complicit in one of the greatest deceptions in galactic history. And if we refuse? Marcus's expression remained calm, but the air in the chamber grew heavy with possibility. Then we return to hiding, as we have for millennia. Your empire continues its expansion until you inevitably discover reality physics on your own. What happens after that? Well, the ruins scattered through this sector provide examples of the various outcomes. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was simply the statement of natural consequences, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining gravity to a child standing at the edge of a cliff. Emperor Vorthok looked around his chamber, seeing the choice reflected in his advisors' faces. Accept partnership with beings of godlike power and help maintain the greatest secret in galactic history, or forge ahead alone and risk joining the Eye. Countless civilizations that had destroyed themselves at the threshold of ultimate knowledge. Very well, Ambassador Reed. The Valtharian Empire accepts your proposal. May this partnership prove beneficial to all involved. As Marcus smiled and began to fade back into his natural dimensional state, Emperor Vorthok realized that his empire had just crossed a threshold of its own. They were no longer simply conquerors expanding through the galaxy. They had become guardians of secrets that could either preserve or destroy everything they had built. It was a responsibility he had never wanted, but one that might be the key to ensuring his civilization's survival in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. 6 months after the failed invasion of Earth, the galaxy had settled into a new equilibrium that few truly understood. From the perspective of most civilizations, the Valtharian Empire had discovered a powerful new ally in humanity, leading to rapid technological advancement and the formation of the most formidable military alliance in known space. The truth was far more complex and far more dangerous. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the joint Human-Valtharian Research Station New Horizons, watching her mixed crew work together with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible before the conflict. Humans and Valtharians collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of conventional science while carefully avoiding the truly dangerous territories of reality, physics, Captain Chen called Dr. Zethmore, the Valtharian scientist who had become her closest collaborator. We're receiving priority transmissions from multiple sectors. It appears our announcement of the alliance has had unexpected consequences. Sarah moved to the communications array, already suspecting what they would find. The revelation that humanity possessed advanced technology had sent ripples throughout galactic civilization. While most species had accepted the official explanation that humans and Valtharians had been secretly collaborating for centuries, others had begun asking uncomfortable questions. The first transmission was from the Hegemony of Worlds, a coalition of species that had long competed with the Valtharian Empire for influence. "This is Chancellor Mordek of the Hegemony Fleet," the reptilian leader announced. "We demand full disclosure of the technologies being shared in this alleged alliance. The balance of power in this galaxy cannot be allowed to shift so dramatically without oversight." Sarah grimaced. The Hegemony had always been aggressive and suspicious. If they decided that the human-Valtharian alliance posed an existential threat, they might take preemptive action. The second transmission was worse. "Greetings, children of the younger races," came a voice that seemed to speak directly to their minds rather than their ears. "We are the Eternal Collective, and we have been watching your recent activities with great interest." Dr. Zethmore's mandibles clicked nervously. "Captain, the Eternal Collective hasn't communicated with anyone for over 50,000 years. They're one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy." "I know," Sarah replied grimly. The Eternal Collective was exactly what humanity had been trying to avoid, on an ancient species that had long ago transcended physical existence and possessed reality-shaping abilities that made even human capabilities look primitive. If they had decided to involve themselves in current events, it could mean catastrophe for everyone. "Your recent demonstration of advanced capabilities has not gone unnoticed," the Collective's message continued. "We are aware of the true nature of the beings you call humans, and we find ourselves curious about their intentions." A third transmission arrived, this one from an unexpected source. "This is Captain Velthar of the Independent Traders Guild," came the message. "My people have been monitoring the recent conflicts, and we've detected energy signatures that match entries in our oldest archives." "We need to talk." Sarah exchanged glances with Dr. Zethmore. The Traders Guild was supposedly composed of merchants and explorers, but their ships often displayed technology that seemed far more advanced than anything available on the open market. "If they had archives containing information about reality-shaping species, Doctor," Sarah said quietly, "activate the quantum communication array. We need to contact the Council immediately." Within minutes, the holographic forms of humanity's highest leadership materialized in the command center. Director Harrison of the Reality Physics Department, Ambassador Chen Wei-Ming, and most importantly, Elder Maria Santos, one of the few humans who had been alive when humanity first encountered other galactic civilizations. "The situation is developing faster than we anticipated," Director Harrison said without preamble. "Our intelligence networks are reporting unusual activity throughout the galaxy. Several species are accelerating their research into exotic physics. Others are forming new alliances specifically to counter the perceived threat of human-Valtharian cooperation." Elder Santos stepped forward, her ancient eyes carrying the weight of centuries. "This is what we feared would happen if our true nature was revealed. The galaxy is entering a period of instability that could lead to conflicts far worse than anything we've seen before." "What are our options?" Sarah asked. "Limited," Ambassador Chen replied. "We could attempt to disappear again, abandoning our colonies and returning to deep hiding. But too many people now know we exist. The secret can't be contained indefinitely." "We could reveal the full truth," Director Harrison suggested. "Explain exactly what humanity is and why we've remained hidden. Some species might understand the necessity, and others would panic," Elder Santos countered. "The knowledge that reality shapers exist among them would trigger responses ranging from worship to genocidal fear. Either outcome serves galactic stability." Dr. Zethmore spoke up hesitantly. "There is a third option. The Valtharian Empire could claim that we developed these technologies together, that our alliance has unlocked new frontiers of science through collaboration rather than revelation of pre-existing capabilities. That might work for conventional species," Sarah said. "But what about the Eternal Collective? They clearly know the truth. As if summoned by her words, the command center filled with a presence that made reality itself seem more solid. When the representative of the Eternal Collective materialized, it appeared as a shifting geometric pattern that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humans, the entity spoke without sound, its communication flowing directly into their minds. Your attempts at deception are unnecessary. We have long known of your presence in this galaxy. Elder Santos stepped forward, showing no fear of the cosmic entity before them. Honored Collective, we meant no disrespect. Our concealment was intended to maintain stability, and admirably successful it has been. Your species has grown wisely, learning restraint before power, developing ethics before capability. This is unusual. The entity's form shifted, somehow conveying amusement despite its alien nature. We have observed many species approach the threshold you crossed eons ago. Most destroy themselves within centuries of gaining reality-shaping abilities. A few transcend physical existence as we have done, but none have chosen your path, remaining embodied while wielding cosmic power. It seemed the most responsible choice, Elder Santos replied. Indeed, which is why we have decided to support your efforts rather than oppose them. The collective's presence grew warmer, more protective. The younger races are not ready for the knowledge you possess, but they are developing in ways that show promise. Given time and guidance, some may eventually prove worthy of such capabilities. Sarah felt relief flood through her. If the Eternal Collective supported humanity's approach, it would deter other ancient species from interfering. However, the entity continued, your recent exposure has accelerated certain timelines. The hegemony of worlds is developing weapons specifically designed to counter reality-shaping abilities. The Independent Traders Guild is preparing to reveal knowledge that could destabilize multiple sectors, and several younger species are attempting to reverse engineer technologies beyond their understanding. The implications were staggering. Humanity's forced revelation had triggered an arms race that could lead to exactly the kind of catastrophe they had spent millennia trying to prevent. What do you propose? Director Harrison asked. Controlled revelation. Rather than allowing knowledge to spread chaotically, we guide its dissemination. Working together, our species and yours could carefully introduce reality physics to selected civilizations, those that have demonstrated sufficient wisdom and stability. A gradual uplift program, Ambassador Chen mused, bringing species to the threshold slowly with proper preparation and safeguards. Precisely. The Valtharian Empire would be an ideal test case. They have proven themselves capable of stability and growth. With proper guidance, they could become the first younger race to safely cross the threshold. Elder Santos considered this proposal carefully. It would mean abandoning our policy of total concealment in favor of selective revelation. Highly risky. All paths are risky now, the collective replied. Your secret is already compromised. The question is whether the revelation proceeds with wisdom or chaos. Sarah looked around the command center, seeing the faces of humans and Valtharians who had learned to work together despite their vast differences. Perhaps this was the way forward. Not hiding from the younger races, but carefully guiding them toward the wisdom they would need to survive their own advancement. Very well, Elder Santos said finally. Humanity accepts the proposal. We will work with the Eternal Collective and our Valtharian allies to begin a controlled introduction of reality physics to selected species. As the Collective's presence faded and the holographic council members signed off, Sarah realized that they had just committed to a plan that would reshape galactic civilization over the coming millennia. The age of hiding was ending, but perhaps the age of wisdom was beginning. Catastrophe would depend on how well humanity could teach the lessons they had learned through eons of careful restraint. 1 year later, the transformation of galactic civilization had begun in earnest. Though few realized the true scope of what was happening, the Great Teaching, as historians would later call it, appeared to most observers as a remarkable period of technological advancement and philosophical development. The reality was far more profound. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the first graduating class of the Galactic Institute for Advanced Physics, watching representatives from 47 different species receive certification in what the public knew as quantum dimensional engineering. The students believed they were learning cutting-edge technology. In truth, they were receiving the first careful introduction to reality physics that any non-human species had been offered in millions of years. Today, you become pioneers, Elena told the assembled graduates. You carry with you not just knowledge but responsibility. The forces you have learned to manipulate are powerful beyond measure. Use them wisely. Among the graduates, she saw faces that filled her with hope. Lieutenant Kesavara of the Valtharian Empire, who had demonstrated remarkable intuition for dimensional mathematics. Dr. Thixmore of the Crystal Mines, whose multifaceted consciousness could perceive quantum states directly. Engineer Paul Seth of the Democratic Union, who had developed elegant solutions to containment problems that had puzzled human scientists for centuries. These beings represented the first generation of what humanity hoped would be a new type of galactic civilization, species that possessed reality-shaping abilities but also the wisdom to use them responsibly. Ambassador Marcus. Reed materialized beside Elena, his form more stable than it had been during his early diplomatic missions. The partnership between humanity and the Eternal Collective had allowed human reality shapers to refine their abilities while learning from beings who had transcended physical existence eons ago. The first phase is complete, he reported. 47 species now have basic understanding of reality physics. The monitoring stations report no dangerous experiments or accidental instabilities. And the resistance movements? Marcus's expression grew more serious. The hegemony of worlds continues to develop anti-reality weapons, but their research is proceeding along predictable lines. We can counter anything they produce. More concerning is the Purist Coalition. They've declared reality physics to be an abomination that threatens the natural order. Elena nodded grimly. The Purist Coalition was composed of species that rejected the new knowledge entirely, viewing reality manipulation as a violation of cosmic law. While their intentions were arguably noble, their ignorance made them dangerous. They had begun attacking research facilities and assassinating scientists working in dimensional physics. The collective believes the purists will ultimately destroy themselves, Marcus continued. Species that refuse to adapt when the galaxy around them is changing rarely survive long-term. But they could cause significant damage before that happens. A new presence entered the chamber, not physically, but as a shift in the fundamental structure of local space-time. Elder Maria Santos had arrived, her mastery of reality physics now so complete that she existed primarily as a pattern of conscious intention given form. The second phase is ready to begin, she announced. The Valtharian Empire has volunteered to be the first younger species to attempt full reality integration. This was the moment they had all been working toward. The careful introduction of reality physics had been preparation for something unprecedented, helping an entire civilization safely cross the threshold that had destroyed so many others throughout galactic history. Emperor Vorthak himself had undergone the preliminary training, demonstrating the kind of personal commitment that humanity's experience suggested was necessary for successful transition. The Valtharian leadership understood that they were volunteering to become something new, to transform their species in ways that would echo through eternity. The risks remain enormous, Elena said. Even with all our preparation, we're essentially performing an experiment that has never been attempted before. All progress requires risk, Elder Santos replied. The alternative is stagnation, and stagnation ultimately leads to extinction. The Valtharians have chosen to evolve rather than remain static. Through the Institute's quantum communication network, they could observe the preparations taking place throughout Valtharian space. Research stations had been established in carefully chosen locations where spacetime was naturally stable. Teams of human reality shapers worked alongside Valtharian scientists to create the safeguards that would prevent accidental catastrophe. Most importantly, the Eternal Collective had agreed to provide direct oversight during the transition. If something went wrong, they possessed the power to contain any damage before it could spread. Initiation begins in 6 hours, Marcus reported. All monitoring stations are online. Containment fields are stable. The volunteer subjects are prepared. The first phase would involve only 1,000 Valtharians, carefully selected for their psychological stability and philosophical commitment to responsible use of power. If successful, the program would gradually expand to include the entire species over the course of several generations. As the hours counted down, representatives from across the galaxy watched through quantum-linked observation networks. This would be the first time in recorded history that a species had successfully guided another across the reality threshold. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering. At the designated moment, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Throughout Valtharian space, the volunteers began the process that would transform them from biological beings bound by conventional physics into entities capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of existence. The transition was unlike anything ever recorded. Where previous species had either burned out in cascading disasters or transcended physical existence entirely, the Valtharians found a middle path. With human guidance and collective oversight, they learned to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states while retaining their original biological forms. Incredible, breathed Dr. Thixmore, monitoring the process from the Institute. They're maintaining coherent consciousness across 17 different dimensional phases simultaneously, and their reality-shaping abilities are manifesting gradually rather than explosively, added Lieutenant Kesavara. This controlled approach is allowing them to develop the necessary ethical frameworks before gaining dangerous levels of power. As the first day of the Great Transformation concluded, it became clear that the experiment was succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. The Valtharian volunteers had not only survived the transition, but were demonstrating remarkable stability and wisdom in their new state. More importantly, their success was being observed by species throughout the galaxy. The proof that the threshold could be crossed safely was already inspiring other civilizations to begin their own preparation for eventual transformation. This changes everything, Elena said, watching the data streams that showed successful reality integration across multiple test subjects. For the first time in galactic history, we have a path forward that doesn't lead to extinction or transcendence. Elder Santos smiled, her ancient face showing satisfaction at a plan that had taken centuries to develop. Humanity has found its true purpose, not to rule or hide, but to teach, to help other species avoid the mistakes that destroyed so many of our predecessors. As news of the successful transformation spread throughout galactic civilization, requests began pouring in from dozens of species seeking admission to the Institute's programs. The galaxy was awakening to possibilities that had been thought impossible, and humanity found itself in the unprecedented position of being teachers rather than guardians. The Empire had indeed forgotten the universe's oldest warning about crossing humanity. But in doing so, they had accidentally triggered the greatest advancement in galactic civilization since the dawn of consciousness itself. The age of hiding was over. The age of careful, wisdom-guided evolution had begun, and in research stations scattered throughout the galaxy, human scientists worked alongside alien colleagues to ensure that the next chapter of cosmic history would be written not in the ashes of failed civilizations, but in the triumph of species learning to transcend their limitations while maintaining their essential nature. The universe had just become a far more interesting place. And for the first time in millions of years, the ancient pattern of threshold reached and destroyed had been broken by something unprecedented, the power of careful teaching, combined with the wisdom to use it responsibly.